The United States, before its land was filled with towering skyscrapers and grand metropolises, used to be a country full of charming little farms. That was until steel, as a product, saw advancements in industrial production. This led to America being covered with buildings everywhere. In this video, I'm going to talk about Andrew Carnegie, the king of America's steel empire, who followed the classic formula, rising from a poor, underprivileged child to someone with power and wealth. We'll take a look at how, in those days, to become a business tycoon, he built, destroyed, and exploited labor to squeeze out massive profits, and how he monopolized the industry. Let's dive in and listen to the story. Support Andrew Carnegie's steel empire and the Sci Money Monster channel by scanning this QR code. Or if you want to support the Sci Money Monster channel, it's super easy. Just hit like, share, or drop a comment to chat with us. You can also save this video to watch the next one. But what I'd love most is if you'd subscribe, so when I upload the next video, we can meet again. Thank you. Andrew Carnegie was born in Scotland. He came from a family that wasn't very wealthy because his father was a handloom weaver, weaving cloth by hand, so their income wasn't much. Then, during that time, the Industrial Revolution happened. When the mechanical loom was introduced, people who wove cloth by hand, well, their already small income disappeared completely. Andrew Carnegie once said that he had the experience of seeing his father go out and beg for work outside the house. He was rejected, scolded, and no one wanted to hire Andrew's father at all. This was a painful experience for a little boy. Then, around 1848, there was news about a land of hope called the United States of America. At that time, Andrew's family decided to sell everything they had in Scotland and set out for this land of hope in America. But when they arrived, it turned out that finding work wasn't as easy as they had thought. With the skills his father had, Andrew Carnegie, who had only been in school for 5 years, had to drop out to search for a way to support his family. Andrew got his first job at a local cotton spinning factory, working 12 hours a day for a weekly wage of $1.20. $1.20 might sound like an incredibly small amount to us, but believe it or not, Andrew said that there was never any other amount of money that made him as happy as that first wage of $1.20 in his life. As Andrew grew older, at age 14, he got a new job as a telegraph messenger. At that time, his pay increased from $1.20 a week to $2.50 a week, more than double. Plus, this job gave Andrew the chance to meet high society and influential people. Since he had to deliver telegrams, he got to meet everyone, right? And when he rode his bicycle to make deliveries, he would greet everyone. What Andrew did was try to remember who with who. When he delivered telegrams, he'd make a point to figure out which people were influential, which ones were wealthy, and so on. He made it his goal that whenever he rode his bike past someone he recognized, he would always greet them. This strategy of remembering faces to make a good impression really worked. At that time, Thomas Scott, the regional manager of the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, highly impressed by Andrew's professional skills, Thomas invited Andrew to work as his personal secretary with a weekly salary of $35 every single week, which was a significant increase. Once Andrew started working with Scott and saw how things were managed in such a massive and complex corporation, his potential grew tremendously. And when Thomas Scott was promoted to president of the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, Andrew Carnegie's career began to advance quite rapidly as well. Thomas was like a mentor, a teacher to Andrew, because Thomas taught Andrew everything. The relationship between Thomas and Andrew was really strong. One day, Thomas even taught Andrew about finance. He guided Andrew through his first stock purchase, which was shares in Adams Express. The value of Adams Express stock shot up quickly, so Andrew learned that if you invest your money wisely, it can generate returns easily without you even having to work for it. This lesson stuck with Andrew. Let your money work for you. instead of trading your own labor for money. But then, unfortunately, in 1861, the Civil War broke out in the United States. Andrew was drafted into the army, but since he had started to accumulate some wealth, he paid $300 for someone else to take his place instead of serving himself. It was during the height of the American Civil War that Andrew first noticed something quite remarkable. And then in 1865, at the young age of 30, Andrew was already earning an impressive $50,000 a year. He was certainly a very rich man by then. He eventually left the Pennsylvania Railroad Company and went to work for a specialized firm called the Keystone Bridge Company, which built massive iron bridges. At that particular time, Andrew saw a significant opportunity that was just beginning to emerge. The weakness during the Civil War was wooden bridges, because wooden bridges could easily be attacked and set on fire by the enemy. The way to solve this pain point with bridges was to sap and leck? Wait, are you talking about buying electronics at Sap and Leck? No, that's a different Sap and Leck. When Andrew went in to manage the Keystone Bridge Company, he wasn't just overseeing bridge construction. He also got involved in managing his own steel production. And the key thing that gave Andrew an advantage over others was his strong connections in the railroad industry, because Andrew had previously worked for Scott in Pennsylvania. Railroads, right? So that allowed Andrew to easily close sales with the railroad companies he knew. Eventually, Andrew got an offer to build a steel bridge across the Mississippi River. Up until then, honestly, no one had ever done it before. At that time, building a steel bridge was expensive, and it was normal for them to collapse after being built. But Andrew stood by the Mississippi River and thought, come on, you can do this. Just build a steel bridge from here to the other side, strong and sturdy, without collapsing. It had to be possible. So Andrew traveled all over the country to meet with steel manufacturers, steel mill owners, chemists, and eventually he met an inventor named Henry Bessemer. Bessemer invented a new method for refining steel from molten pig iron. This method was not only faster and more efficient, but also cheaper. Bessemer's converter looked something like this, a pear-shaped vessel that allowed him to produce steel in large quantities, basically on an industrial scale. Back then, making steel usually took a lot of time. It used to take 2 weeks to produce steel, but thanks to Bessemer's innovation, it could now be made in just 15 minutes. So Andrew went back and set up his own steel factory using Bessemer's technology. Then, in 1865, after years of hard work, Andrew managed to build a steel bridge across the Mississippi River. It was the first large steel bridge over the river that was actually functional at the time. Back then, were people brave enough to cross the bridge? Maybe not yet, but Andrew had a spectacular way to launch the bridge. On opening day, he brought an elephant to walk across the steel bridge to show everyone that if an elephant could cross, then regular people definitely could too. The bridge was incredibly strong. This was the Eads Bridge, and once Andrew had his own steel company, he named it the Etna Thompson Steel Works. Whose name is that? It's not Andrew's. Andrew was like, why should I name the company after myself? The name Andrew chose was actually the name of a major client. And yes, it belonged to someone who was extremely influential in the railroad business. And as soon as Andrew established the company under that name, of course, Edgar Thomson immediately gave him business. He immediately placed an order, 2,000 rails from Andrew Carnegie's company. With both capital and technology, Andrew Carnegie's steel factory was able to produce a huge amount of steel. At that time, they could produce up to 225 tons of steel per day. Because Andrew Carnegie's steel was cheap, high quality, and produced in large quantities, the company made a massive profit. And when it came to making big profits, Andrew had a motto: take care of your costs. And then the profits would come on their own. Andrew kept costs down using what could only be called ruthless methods. He made his workers put in 12-hour shifts 7 days a week all year round. The only day off Andrew gave them was July 4th. Many workers suffered serious injuries on the job. Dying at work was actually pretty common because there was no safety equipment or accident prevention measures at all. It's all about costs, keeping costs as low as possible. The workers were pushed to their absolute limits, physically and mentally. They had no creativity, no motivation to work, no inspiration, and absolutely no sense of pride. They didn't even have basic safety, let alone anything else. But what was brutal for the workers ended up being a game changer in terms of efficiency for Andrew Carnegie's company. It made Andrew's company one of the biggest producers in the world, with the highest profits in the world, because they were able to keep wages the lowest. Number one in the world, at that time, the steel business was becoming more and more successful until suddenly disaster struck. All the railroad companies, Andrew Carnegie's biggest customers, started having problems. The first reason was that in the railroad business, everyone was building railways everywhere. There was way too much supply, and the competition was fierce. The sides competing with each other in an extremely red ocean. Still, they had the bad luck of running into an economic recession, which caused orders from the railroad industry to slow down immediately. And to make matters worse, at that very moment, a shrewd guy named John D. Rockefeller swooped in to take advantage of the railroad industry's tough times. If you haven't seen the John D. Rockefeller clip yet, go check it out to see how he managed to squeeze every last drop out of the railroad companies. Basically, here's what happened. John D. Rockefeller knew that the railroad companies were struggling. So John called the railroad companies in to negotiate a deal. He wanted them to cut their service fees for him by half and then charge his competitors double the normal rate. The extra money they made from overcharging his competitors, that had to go straight to John. At that time, the railroad companies were struggling and desperately needed customers, so they agreed to the deal, even though it was obvious this was a hellish deal, and the only one who benefited was John. But the railroad companies had no choice. The railroad companies had no choice but agree to lower the rates. But as it turned out, running things that way just wasn't sustainable. They were losing money. So the railroad companies had to go back and try to renegotiate with John, asking if they could make the deal a bit more balanced. And John's answer to the railroad companies was a flat-out no. Back then, anyone who went against John D. Rockefeller ended up bankrupt and wiped out of the industry. That was the kind of power John D. Rockefeller had. He drove companies and entire sectors related to the railroads into bankruptcy. A lot of people just disappeared from the scene entirely. The key point for today's story in this clip is that one of the people who was hit the hardest by John D. Rockefeller's actions was Thomas Scott, the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad Company. He was actually a very close mentor to Andrew Carnegie. He taught him everything and brought him into the business. So when Thomas Scott ran into trouble, he reached out to Andrew for help. He asked, "Can you help me out? Things are really bad in Pennsylvania." But Andrew didn't help because he told his mentor, honestly, right now, even though there's a lot of money moving around, it's all tied up in production. So Andrew didn't step in, and that left Pennsylvania in a really bad spot. So bad that by 1881, Thomas Scott passed away. When Andrew Carnegie found out his mentor had died, all he could do was stand sadly by his mentor's grave, thinking to himself, he thought, "You're the one who killed my mentor." After that, Andrew decided he had to get revenge on John D. Rockefeller. The way Andrew planned to get his revenge was by telling himself, "I have to be richer than you." At that point, the railroad business, which used to be Andrew's biggest customer, had already collapsed, right? So Andrew thought, there must be somewhere else I can sell to. With the railroad business gone, the new frontier Andrew came up with was buildings. Skyscrapers in the United States, to be exact. After that, Andrew got involved in selling steel for skyscrapers and helped build tens of thousands of them. This transformed the landscape of the United States, from what used to be cute little farms to being filled with tall buildings everywhere, eventually turning into a metropolis full of skyscrapers. At that point, Andrew was truly rich because he was able to make a profit of over $1,500,000 a year. But even then, he still wasn't as rich as John D. Rockefeller. So Andrew thought he needed to find a partner to help him grow the business and become even wealthier. Andrew believed that Henry Clay Frick, a ruthless and notoriously merciless industrial manager, would be the perfect fit to help him build an ultra-wealthy empire. So after that, Yu and Frick became a duo that could be called partners in crime. They were always up to some kind of mischief. For example, they started rumors about a rival steel company called Duquesne, spreading news that Duquesne Steel had problems. This led to Duquesne going bankrupt. Then, the second thing Andrew and Frick did was swoop in and buy Duquesne at a dirt cheap price. But that's not all. If you thought that was bad, it's actually nothing compared to what came next. Andrew and Frick went and bought land on the hills of Pittsburgh to build an incredibly exclusive club for the wealthiest people in the entire country, called the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. The land was absolutely beautiful because it had a massive, huge dam that held about 20 million tons of water sitting on very high elevated ground. It was about 14 miles from Johnstown, a city where lots of workers and their families lived. After they bought the land, they turned it into a fishing pond, built roads, basically did everything to make it luxurious. The only thing they didn't focus on was safety. Then, in 1889, a huge storm hit. The water in the dam became way too much, and the dam broke, completely collapsed. Millions of gallons of water rushed down into the city below, where all those workers and families lived. The flood in Johnstown became one of the worst man-made disasters of that era. It killed 2,209 people, including 400 children. It took many, many years to recover all the bodies, because when the water hit, some of the victims were swept away for miles. Then Andrew, Frick, and the other members of this exclusive club combined their vast financial resources to keep the club from attracting any unwanted public scrutiny and to avoid having to take full responsibility for the catastrophic events that had unfolded. That specific incident was a form of violence that happened outside the company, right? But the bitter conflict between Andrew and Frick was far from over at that point. There was also a great deal of violence happening inside the company as well. Originally, it was all about exploiting the workers, which led the laborers whose contracts were about to expire to band together and form a labor union. It was called the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers. The union came out to demand fair wage increases and better safety measures. When Hal Frick saw the employees coming forward with complaints, he decided to take up the issue. And did he respond by agreeing to raise their wages? So in that specific case, any group of workers who gathered together to file a formal complaint had their wages cut by 22% immediately. And Frick also stated that in this era of labor unions, just think about this for a moment. Imagine you are a hardworking employee at Andrew Carnegie's massive company, which is booming and making huge profits right now. And then you keep getting your wages pushed down again and again. Plus, there's no workplace safety. Getting injured or even killed on the job is just normal. So you and your coworkers come together to demand a fair wage and ask for better safety. But the business owner responds by immediately cutting your pay by 22%. If that were you, wouldn't you be angry? Of course you'd be angry, right? The answer is yes, you'd be mad. And at that time, what Andrew did was he realized there was unrest brewing. Andrew left the factory and went on vacation in Scotland in 1892. Before he left, he told Frick, "Handle everything as you see fit, Frick." Both Frick and Andrew already knew that the workers were protesting and that things could get violent, so they prepared for it. They even stocked up in advance. So even if the workers protested or whatever happened, Frick and Andrew would still have goods to sell. They were very thorough. But one thing that we weren't prepared for and didn't expect was the unity of the workers. Thousands of workers banded together, went on strike, and took over the Homestead plant on July 6, 1892. So Frick hired armed mercenaries called the Pinkerton Group. He brought in 300 of them. At first, Frick thought he could just use the Pinkertons to intimidate the workers, but the workers didn't see it that way. When all 300 Pinkertons showed up to threaten them in front of the factory, the workers, who were already angry, were furious. They actually pleaded with the Pinkertons to leave. They begged them for days, but the Pinkertons refused to go. That refusal was basically a declaration of war. After that, the workers grabbed anything they could find to use as weapons. And then they fought. Historians aren't really sure whether it was the workers or the Pinkertons who started it, but what we do know is that soon, all around Andrew Carnegie's Homestead plant, the air was filled with the sounds of rocks being thrown, gunshots, and screams. The brutal fighting went on for 12 hours. Both sides suffered casualties and brutal beatings. 9 Homestead workers were killed in total. 7 Pinkertons were killed, and there were countless injuries on both sides. But in the end, no matter how hard the workers fought, those without power are always the ones who lose out in the end. After the Homestead strike happened, the governor of Pennsylvania sent in 8,000 troops to restore order. They came in to restore order and returned the factory to Andrew. The workers who took part in the incident were forced to leave their jobs. Some lost their jobs, some lost their homes, and some even lost their lives. And because of this event, there were no steel industry labor unions for the next 45 years. At the time, this was big news, and the public was pretty upset and angry about what happened at the Homestead plant. Andrew came back from his vacation home to give an interview to the media. Andrew said, "If I had been there, none of this would have happened." That statement really turned heads, because do you know what it means? It means Andrew put all the blame on Frick. Even though before going on vacation, Andrew told Frick, "Do whatever you think is appropriate. Do whatever it takes." In the end, the hellish partnership between Andrew and Frick fell apart in the worst way. Andrew Carnegie, at the age of 70, decided to retire. He sold his steel business to John Pierpont Morgan, the owner of J.P. Morgan, for $480 million. Then he dedicated the rest of his life to spending the enormous fortune he had accumulated. He devoted his life to philanthropy and education, building more than 2,000 library buildings around the world. By that time, Andrew was already quite old. He thought that before he passed away, he wanted to send a letter to Frick, his former partner with whom he had shared so many hardships until their falling out. So he had a messenger deliver the letter. In that letter, he wrote something along the lines of, "You and I, we are both getting old. Is there truly no reason remaining for us to hold on to these past conflicts and not reconcile? Surely it is certainly the right time for us to make peace and finally meet face to face." So the messenger carefully carried that important letter to Frick. When Frick read the letter and saw the valid reason for reconciliation and meeting in person, he slowly folded the piece of paper and told the messenger, "So you're here to deliver a message about meeting Andrew, huh? Go and tell Andrew that we will surely meet him in hell, because that is exactly where the both of us are headed right now."